My name is Mark Rand. For those of you that don't know me, I am a current city councilman for the city of Imperial. Been on there for about 17 years, but don't tell my wife because that'll blow the idea that I'm only 40 years old. But I've been on the city council. I've also been a consultant and in real estate for 20 years. And so I run Strictly Business as my business. I do development consulting in real estate here, and I'm also a broker in Arizona. So for a shameless plug, come see me if you're thinking about doing a development in the area. I have material in the back at the registration desk, and I'd love to talk to you about that. So let's move on with the program this morning. I also wanted to let you know that I'm dressed in a tuxedo this morning, and that's because I wanted to show my friends that I actually do clean up. I've been getting a lot of garbage this morning about being dressed this way because I'm normally in a cowboy hat and jeans. And so this is a new look for me, and so I want all my friends to appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, let's move right on. We got a great program for you today, and we have a few keynote speakers this morning, and so I want to get them started. The first one is our chairman for the Board of Supervisors. Let me read a little bit of his bio. You all have their bios in your packets, and so you can read the whole thing. I'll just give a few highlights. Ray Castillo is a lifelong resident of the area. He was elected to the Imperial County Board of Supervisors, District 5, in November of 2010 in the 5th District, and he represents the communities of El Centro, Calexico, Brawley, Hopeville, Winter Haven, and Palo Verde. And prior to his election to the Board of Supervisors, he had been elected to the El Centro City Council and subsequently appointed mayor. So please help me welcoming our chairman of the Board of Supervisors, Ray Castillo.
Good morning, everyone. Before I start, I'd just like to say a little joke here, kind of loosen things up a little. What do you have? You got 40 politicians up to their neck in sand. Not enough sand. So sometimes we have to laugh at ourselves. Another joke, and this is kind of a semi-religious joke, if you will. There was this lady reading her Bible, sitting in her house, and all of a sudden an intruder breaks into her house. And the first thing out of her mouth is Acts 2:38, of course referring to the Bible that she was reading. And the burglar froze, dialed 911, the police came and arrested him. And they asked him, you surrendered to this elderly lady, what happened? He says, well, I'm not going to go against someone that has an axe and 238s. Anyway, I'm not a comedian, but just a politician. And so with that, start out, once again, good morning to all of you. And on behalf, first of all, recognize my fellow board supervisors that are here with me today. District 1, John Renison, and he's out here somewhere. There he is in the back. Thank you, John. District 2, Supervisor Jack Terrazas. Jack. Thank you. And District 3, Supervisor Mike Kelly. District 4, Supervisor Ryan Kelly. Where are you, Ryan? He's somewhere, some here. Anyway, but thank you, fellow supervisors, for joining me here today, and all of you. So on behalf of the Imperial County Board of Supervisors, I want to thank and welcome all of you for coming to participate in the Imperial Valley Renewable Energy Summit. I particularly want to congratulate the Imperial Valley Economic Development Corporation and all of its members and sponsors for helping put together another successful event this year. At this conference, we have all the players gathered together who have brought about what I have been calling the dawn of a renewable future, which was a theme of the recent State of the County address that I gave about 2 weeks ago. Of course, our county has been in the green energy business for over 100 years, though most of that green energy has been in the form of food products that our farmers grow and ship all over the country and throughout the world. And we are proud of the role this county has played in feeding the world with our farm products and we are committed to sustaining the importance of agriculture in Imperial Valley into the future. At the same time, we're also excited about the newer green energy industries taking shape around us, which will help to provide renewable electric power to the rest of California and beyond. In my opinion, what we're seeing taking place here is truly amazing. Solar, wind, geothermal, and alternative fuel projects, and are now becoming a reality along with infrastructure like new transmission lines to support this growth. Today, there are at least 1,000 of our residents working to build these facilities who a year ago were unemployed. And we are witnessing now in just a short start only the dawn of what we see as a bright future for renewables here in Imperial County. We look forward to working with all of you as we continue to bring new opportunities here to Imperial County, and we are proud of being part of the team that has worked so hard to achieve the progress we've seen so far. Thank you for inviting me to participate today, and have a great conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Castillo. Next is a gentleman from the IID. In fact, he's the president of the Imperial Irrigation District Board of Directors. Director Desert serves as the board's president and is the Imperial Irrigation District Director representing Division 1, which includes El Centro and part of Calexico. He represents IID on the California Farm Water Coalition. Director Desert was elected to the IID board in November of 2010. A lifetime resident of Imperial County, Director Desert has been employed as an administrative analyst for the Imperial County Air Pollution Control District for more than 10 years prior to getting on the board. So let's all welcome Mr. Matt Desert.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's my honor and pleasure to be here representing the Imperial Irrigation District and its 5-member board. At this time, I'd like to recognize those 5 members. I don't know if any of them are in the audience, but I'll just throw their names out there, and they don't need to stand up if they're here. That's the directors Jim Hanks, Norma Galindo, Bruce Kuhn, and Steve Benson. And once again, it's an honor and a privilege to be the president of the board at this time and be able to participate and share with you some comments or thoughts about where we're at today and where we're going to in the future. The IID, the Imperial Irrigation District, is a 100-year-old irrigation district that just so happens to also be in the power generation and distribution business. They have their own service area and balancing authority, as I'm sure you all know. We're not real large in size and footprint throughout the state of California or in the region, more so in the region, but we do try to hold our own and make things workable and progress in the future and move forward as we can. I'd like to congratulate the economic development activities, Mr. Tim Kelly, and all your works. Tim, we've talked in the past, these energy summits, about wanting to be great to be at an energy summit in the future when we have these projects being built or completed on the ground, able to see, and that is where we're at today at the 6th Annual Imperial Valley Renewable Energy Summit. We have multiple solar projects being built that you are all aware of and completed. And we have the Pattern Wind Project near completion, as well as an energy source geothermal facility up by the Salton Sea. At this time, I'd like to also recognize a few of the many good folks that have worked so hard for the success that we're realizing today. And I'm sorry if I miss anyone and not capturing your name exactly right or your position, but these are just some of the people that I've met along the road here and have educated and helped me and informed me on these items as we move forward. First of all, I'd like to recognize past elected county supervisor Gary Wyatt, and also past IID director, past board president John Pierre Menville, who have been actively involved in supporting these efforts from their onset. A tremendous amount of leadership there and direction, and all of you know these two gentlemen well. Also, I'd like to recognize Buzz Schott with Sentinel Solar, Robert Ferreira with Tenasca, James Cook with Campo Verde, Martin Herman of 8 Minute Energy, Mark Van Patten with AES, Charlie Hoskins of Sun Peak, Jim Avery and Laura McDonald with San Diego Gas and Electric, Tom DeBose with Development and Design, and Derek Desert also with Development and Design, Andy Horn with the County of Imperial, and all the other great folks at the County of Imperial at the Planning Department that are here with us today, and even those over at the Air Pollution Control District too. Michael Picker with the State's Governor's Office. And on the IED side, we've had a lot of transition and changes there over the years and faces as we've gone through these energy summits and talks. I'd like to recognize the current General Manager, Kevin Kelly, Carl Stills and Mario Escalera, the Energy Department, Jamie Asbury, and Belen Valenzuela. And please, if I missed your name or skipped over it, these are just some of the people that came to mind this morning as I was trying to collect my thoughts. We've learned so much along this road and working together and how to get through these ideas and these concepts that most power utilities haven't seen this type of an outgrowth and project build-out and transmission build-out. You see it periodically, every 10, 15, 20 years. But nothing like this as the IID ever had to be part of or contemplate. Special acknowledgement and hello to a gentleman that I first met when I was elected, Peter Fisher. Peter was a leading driving component for the Sea Solar projects, which turned into the Tenasca projects. Many good meetings there and talks, trying to get to the bottom of what seemed to be holding us back from going forward in the future with these projects. Peter and I talked about it. We had to learn how to communicate with one another better, listen to one another, and somehow find that common ground to move forward. And that's evident from what we have before us today. Also, Laura McDonald, you and I had a great conversation yesterday, and the Cal ISO representative, Stephanie McCorkle, at the AES dedication, talked about how we communicate with one another and what we've learned. And we are much better at it. Hearing what the needs of the county are, hearing what the needs of the IID is. And it's in talks of the county and the IID where we've gotten so much better at it that we're currently working the two agencies, the IID and Imperial County Board of Supervisors, towards some type of settlement arrangement with our ongoing 10-year legal fight regarding water issues. We'll have to see what that outcome holds. But as we work forward with the Board of Supervisors and the IID and the project developers, you know, we get to places and they're crossroads, and those choices we made didn't take us into a direction that didn't allow us to not finish the projects before us today. So that's important to note. It's also important to note that we learned how to hold the meetings, who to talk to, and then when we got into those areas where we needed further directions or assistance, we look forward to the state officials, and Mr. Picker's office and others, to have conference calls with us, and we'll get through those areas that were those bumps in the road that need to be smoothed out. The facility we're in today is the Barbara Worth Country Club, named after a book written by a 1911 novel written by Harold Bale Wright. The backdrop to the novel is about bringing water, keeping water going to a newly developed irrigation district in the desert, and the obstacles that were incurred there and success that came out of that. The author lived, and home site was about 1.5 miles to the west of the facilities today. And that irrigation district, even though it wasn't named the IID in the book, many people know that the story is written here in the valley and about the valley, and they assume that the IID is that irrigation district talked about in the background. And that irrigation district, that's also in the power generation business, distribution business. The IID is 100 years old this last year. The the IID is a small power company in comparison to our neighboring agencies, Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric, and the members that make up the California ISO. We're very small. We're 350 megawatts usage in the wintertime, 1,100 megawatts maximum in the summertime, and yet we have our own balancing authority. We do our own trading. We do everything the big agencies do. And the area, the region is economically viable for those activities of the IID. It's hard sometimes to represent an agency that you're elected to by ratepayers and a population that are very concerned with their power rates based on their socioeconomic levels. And I just want and hope you all understand that, the agencies involved in the companies, that the struggles we have at the IID to do these interconnections, a straight interconnection or somewhat of a not straight interconnection, and the outcomes that are related to how we govern ourselves, plan our budgets, and maintain some type of autonomy and austerity for the IID to move into the future. And that is a future that all the board members, both past board members and current board members, want. There's been some criticisms of the IID in the Imperial County over streamlining activities and hoping to get things smoothed out, and I think we are better on that. And in fact, as evident that we're better at that, there's 2 solar projects currently that are permitted through the county with the proper permitting through the IID for interconnection that don't have purchase power agreements. And this is quite a contrast from the past when these decisions and votes were being looked at from both the Board of Supervisors and the IID Board as needed immediate. We are currently ahead of the curve, ahead of the game, and have these projects available to move forward. Back to that idea of the IID, that kind of small guy in the picture that's trying to hold its own with the power giants that neighbor us. We are the renewable energy capital that people are looking to. Some call it the renewable energy capital of the world. These projects are going forward in Imperial County, in the IID Balancing Authority, the service territory, and they're huge. The projects that interconnect straight into the CAISO system will be larger in megawatt capacity very soon than our whole usage during our peak summer needs. We currently export some 400 megawatts to 450 megawatts of geothermal energy out of this area, green energy. So we are a renewable energy capital, and the IID board and the IID agency embraces that, but we also struggle and will fight to maintain our position and availability, to maintain our viability as the irrigation district that's also in the power business. Thank you for your time today, and once again, Mr. Kelly, Tim Kelly, and everyone, congratulations on your projects, and we'll continue to move forward in a much more rapid manner than we have in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Desert. We have one more opening remarks, but first a little bit of housekeeping. Could everybody turn your phones either off or on vibrate so that we make sure we're not disturbing anybody when the speakers are up here? Thank you very much. Our last opening remarks will be coming from our chairman for the Imperial Valley Economic Development Corporation. I'm getting some. Okay. Mr. Tom DeBose is President of Development, Design, and Engineering in El Centro. Land planning, civil engineering, surveying, and project management are just some of the services offered by the company whose specialty is managing the entitlement of projects. DD&E has offices that serve El Centro, California, and Artesia, New Mexico. DD&E has assisted several solar projects through the planning process and provides civil and surveying and PM services to many renewable projects. So we welcome this morning Mr. Tom DeBose, president of, or chairman of the Imperial Valley Economic Development Corporation.
Thank you and good morning. And unlike Mark, I stuck with my normal uniform. I think most of you know me with my normal attire. Maybe a little bit more dressier pant, but anyway, good morning. And I wanted to congratulate Chairman of this conference, Tom Topouzis, his committee, Tim, and the staff of IVDC for putting together what promises to be an outstanding conference. And I also want to thank all of the folks that are listed up here. You know, this conference has an awful lot to do with IVEDC's well-being as an entity, along with the exciting things that we do to create jobs here in the Imperial County. This is the 6th annual conference, and I wanted to take a step back, maybe in memory lane just a little bit, and think about what it was 6 years ago that we envisioned. 6 years ago, 2 years coming off of the height of development in Imperial County with housing and new industrial and new commercial, and the outstanding year that was in 2006 with over $270 million in building permits pulled in the county. And what did renewable energy look like? What did it mean? What did we envision? Was it dishes in the desert, or was it a field of dark photovoltaic glass? Or was it even solar at all? I remember at one of the tabletops, we had one of our speakers say that solar is never going to happen. And yet, I think that's what we're flourishing with today. The beautiful windmills, what were they going to look like if they ever got approved? And they're not quite done, but they're on their way. Again, both between the photovoltaic and the windmills feeding power into the Sunrise Power Link, which made it possible. What about our friends, or at least we thought were our friends, who eventually became foes, holding up the signs in protest? I guess the idea of green and renewable was okay just as long as it wasn't in their backyard, or they saw a way of maybe personally benefiting from taking a position. But through all of that, we prevailed. I appreciate Matt addressing two individuals who I think deserve that recognition, both former Supervisor Gary Wyatt and ID Director John Pierre Minville, for their work in assisting in making sure that this all happened. And as we went through this process, I think we learned a lot, as Matt had said, about what it takes to get the job done. Again, in those conferences past, we had the County of Imperial and the IID with open arms say, welcome, come into our area, we want you here, we'll work with you. And yet when it got right down to the detail of those contracts, they found out it wasn't quite as easy as they thought that it might be. And yet I applaud both of our partner agencies, the County of Imperial and the IID, for getting through and making these things happen. I know there was a frustrating moment in my office with one of my clients who just shook their head and said, I thought you guys were ready. And I said, we're ready to help. We're simply trying to work our way through this to make sure we're doing the right thing, not just for you and for today, but for the constituents and the ratepayers that could be affected by a wrong decision. And so again, through all of that, we got through it. Calling on the county first and their ability to move things along in the process. You know, I do a lot of different kind of project representation, different kinds of development, and we're blessed to be able to do things here in Imperial County with the agencies like the County of Imperial and the various cities, that things move along at a much quicker pace and a much easier pace than they do in other areas of California. I also am one who really appreciates our Board of Supervisors and the position they took, telling all of those who were interested in bringing those jobs here to make sure that you keep a bunch of them local right here in this valley. The people who would work here, the service companies who work here. And I got to tell you, one of the reasons why I can still stand here and say I'm in business today over the rough times that we've had over the 5 years or so is because of the renewable energy and those new clients who've come into town, and we do appreciate that. And then moving on to the Imperial Irrigation District and our partner agency of the year for this year for IVEDC, and the things that they've done to keep things moving along and yet protecting their ratepayer through the process. Again, this was a challenging time to sit down and put the I's and the T's on the contracts to make sure that all were represented and represented well. And I appreciate folks like my friend Carl Stills within the Energy Department and the new culture that is being stimulated there about how we need to work together and make things happen because these projects benefit all of us, including the district. So what about the future? Well, one could say that we are green with not envy but algae. We're looking forward to new biofuel, biochar, from pharmaceuticals to feedstock to jet fuel. These are the renewable things I think are the future for Imperial County, as well as what I believe will be a rebirth of what originally put us on the renewable map, and that will be geothermal and the retooling of those facilities. You know, this is a conference where relationships are born, deals are made, and jobs are created. And we hope that you take advantage of the opportunity that this conference brings. But I want to close with one special message to my good friend who will be here later this afternoon and tonight's speaker, Mr. Michael Picker. The governor sent his #1 man down to speak to us about renewable. And you know, I got to say that whether your name was Arnold or Jerry, the governor has always been welcome to come here and see for himself what is happening on the ground floor that makes the state of California, who is a leader in renewable, to meet and mingle with the people who in fact lead the charge for California in renewable energy. We hope someday that we're worthy, but in the meantime we'll continue to make things happen and make California remain #1 in the renewable world. Enjoy the conference. Congratulations to all, and look forward to an outstanding event for this remainder of the week. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And yes, we can always rely on you to be the Jimmy Buffett representative, so appreciate that. And I say that in jest, but that is one of his favorites. So Tom and I have gone a long way back, and I consider him a friend. Our next speaker, our opening speaker for this morning, is a very special gentleman. Came all the way from the East Coast to join us, and I thank him for doing that. He's been a speaker here before, and many of you have heard him. And so he's going to give us some insight into what's going on at the Capitol. He is Vice President, Legislative and Regulatory Affairs for Mid-American Energy Holdings Company, a subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway. And he's Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Center for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Technologies, affectionately known as CERT, and Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Geothermal Energy Association. He is an adjunct professor of law at Georgetown University Law Center, where he has taught a seminar on energy issues since 1990. Please give a warm welcome for our opening speaker this morning, Mr. Jonathan Weisgall.
Thanks very much, Mark. Let me emulate the opening from Mark Graham as to what he does. Basically, with that introduction, all he was saying is that I'm a bottom-feeding, scum-sucking lobbyist, but don't tell my mother. She thinks I play piano in a whorehouse. Okay. I didn't come with any jokes, so I had to start with something. Quick overview of Mid-American. large energy company, but we started here in Imperial County. We started as a small geothermal company, and that's still our roots. We've grown a great deal. We move a lot of natural gas in the U.S. Through those two pipelines. We've got a couple of utilities. But in the last year, we have created a platform called Mid-American Renewables, and it's been very exciting because we have grown from our geothermal base to do a great deal of wind and to also enter the solar market. So if you look at this map, and it's probably hard for folks in the back of the room to see much here, but a lot of dots in California and right across the border. Solar projects at Agua Caliente project with an off-taker of PG&E, another solar project up at San Luis Obispo County, another one we've just announced that straddles Kern and Los Angeles counties. But our roots here go back to Imperial and to geothermal. I want to cover in my time, I want to go through some interesting, an analysis of what the 2012 election was all about and what it might portend. The impact of the fiscal legislation, you've been hearing the new word in our vocabulary of sequestration, what's going on there, what the impact of all that will be on federal legislation in Congress, and then end with some of the California renewable energy challenges that you'll be hearing a lot about later today. So some would say the election results were really no real change. The Democrats kept the White House, the Democrats kept the Senate, and the Republicans kept the House. No big deal. That's right, but there were some interesting trends, and I want to talk about some of those. President Obama did win 52% of the popular vote, and the electoral vote, 332 to 206. It was very interesting. There were 12 so-called swing states, kind of too close to call until the very last days before the election. States like Nevada, Ohio, Florida, Michigan, Iowa, New Mexico, New Hampshire. Obama carried 11 of those 12 swing states, all but North Carolina. Yes, it was a close popular vote, but indeed 5 elections since 1960 have been even closer. Now here's some interesting demographics. Yes, he was reelected to a second term with fewer votes than when first elected, and that's the first time that's happened with a president who's got a second term. His electoral college margin was lower because of the result was the same with all states except for North Carolina. But the demographics are quite telling. 93% of African Americans voted for Obama, 71% of Hispanics, 80% of Asian Americans. Romney got the vote, the overwhelming vote from white voters, and did better than McCain did in 2008. But the share of white voters has declined. Obama carried women by 11% and single women by huge numbers. Married women broke a little bit for Romney. Romney won decisively with independent voters by 5 points. The first candidate to win the independent vote and lose the election. And most interesting, and I'm going to come back to this, Democrats actually won the popular vote. If you look at all votes cast for the White House, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, the Democrats won, but of course the Republicans kept the House. Now, Senate results going into this election, every single pundit was saying that the Republicans would probably take over the Senate, simply because of the math. Democrats were defending 23 seats, Republicans were defending only 11 seats. Amazingly enough, Democrats not only did not lose control of the Senate, but actually net basis picked up 2 seats. Lost Nebraska, but picked up Massachusetts and Maine. Not a single Democratic incumbent lost. So in the new Congress, that narrow Democratic majority, 53-47, has grown to 55-45, with counting the Maine and Vermont independents with the Democrats. Still not at the 60 votes needed to invoke cloture and move. You really can't get a bill through the Senate without 60 votes, but that trend was rather surprising. In the House, yes, Republicans kept a majority. Democrats gained 8 seats, so the new breakdown is 234 to 201. Republicans, almost all their gains were in the South. There is today not a single Republican member of the House of Representatives from any state in New England. The Blue Dogs lost badly, the moderate Democrats. 11 Tea Party-backed freshmen from the Republican Party were defeated as well. And the really interesting statistic to me now, when you look at the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives, most Democrats today in the House are women and minorities, not white males. Big, big changes. Now, looking ahead, the Republicans face a number of challenges. The last Republican candidate to win more than 300 electoral votes was George H.W. Bush in 1988. And when you look at the last 6 elections, the Republicans have lost the popular vote in 5 of those 6. And there is almost at this point a Democratic lock on the Electoral College. When you look at those last 6 elections, 18 states in the District of Columbia have consistently gone for the Democrats. That's 242 electoral votes right there. So that's 28 short of what's needed for victory. At the same time, the Democrats are facing a number of challenges. At the presidential level, only once since World War II has a party won the presidency 3 times in a row. That was Reagan, Bush in the 80s. So it's certainly going to be a challenge at the presidential level for the Democrats. In the Senate, again, like in 2012, when the Democrats were defending 23 seats to 11 for the Republicans, it's going to be 20 to 13. So again, the math is not looking good for the Democrats going into 2014, the off-year elections. Those Republican seats, those 13, are in solid red states. There's really not a single Republican incumbent who's being challenged, although I must say there have been quite a few who have simply retired. I think it's now up to 8. The Democrats have got to defend 6 seats in states that Romney carried by 14 or more points. That's a huge challenge. States like West Virginia, Arkansas, Alaska, South Dakota, Louisiana, Democratic senators will be up for re-election in those states in 2014. Those are going to be very tough to hold. You had a number of retirements. There will now be an open seat in Iowa with Senator Harkin retiring. Last week, Senator Levin, Carl Levin of Michigan, announcing he'll be retiring. So it's going to be a real challenge for the Democrats to keep the Senate. Now, looking ahead, half the Republicans won their districts with 60% or more of the vote. What does that mean? That means they're really not worried about their Democratic challenger in 2014. They're worried about the right wing. They are worried about losing in a Republican primary to a more conservative candidate. And that's affecting some of the ongoing gridlock in Washington. Now, I said earlier that the Democrats won the popular vote for the White House, for the Senate, and for the House of Representatives. So if the Democrats won the popular vote for all those 435 members of the House of Representatives, why do the Republicans control it? Let me give you 2 answers. One is redistricting, which occurs under the Constitution every 10 years. So after 2010, after the census, there was a redistricting. Some states lost seats in the House, others gained. Republicans controlled state governments in 21 states, and by control, I mean both houses and the governorship. So they very effectively redrew districts to optimize their representation. What do I mean by that? Let's take Pennsylvania as an example. Obama carried it handily, but when you look at the 18 House seats in Pennsylvania, 13 of the 18 were won by Republicans. Democrats only won 8. In Virginia, which went for the last 2 elections now for Obama, 8 of the 11 House seats went for Republicans. And you can go on. Other states, Ohio, the same. 12 of Ohio's 16 House seats broke for Republicans while Obama carried the state. So one issue here is the redistricting that has occurred, and that will, of course, last until 2020, so there will probably not be any change there until after the 2020 census or the 2022 election. But let me suggest a second factor here. It's not just redistricting, it's districting. a new demographic. We are, as a country, increasingly moving into communities populated by folks who emulate our own lifestyles, including our political views. These are now called landslide counties that we live in. In other words, counties that gave 60% or more of their vote either to a Democratic or a Republican candidate for the presidency. And this has been an interesting trend. Back in the mid-'70s, only about a quarter of our voters lived in these landslide counties, ones that broke 60% or more. And that percentage has increased dramatically, such that in 2012 election, over half of voters lived in these landslide counties. So what does that mean? Kind of an interesting trend. In 1988, for example, when George the father beat Michael Dukakis, remember him? Beat him soundly in the Electoral College. Dukakis only carried 819 of the 300 and 143 counties in the United States. So do the math. He carried about 1/3 of all the counties in the United States. Obama carried only 600 counties. 600 of 3,143 counties. That's about 29% of the counties in the United States. But those counties are concentrated. Orange County, Manhattan County, Dade County in Florida. And as a result, a lot of Democratic votes would get piled up in these counties. There were precincts in Philadelphia, precincts in other large cities that went for Obama by 99.9%. So that is a second factor that I think has affected all of this. And, you know, the takeaway with these landslide counties and this whole trend of palling around and living with and really socializing with folks who share your own views, you know, a little takeaway suggestion, which is try not to get trapped in your own political echo chamber. You know, MSNBC and Fox News don't really help, but if you are a conservative voter and you watch Fox News, try MSNBC once in a while, try CNN. And, you know, for my liberal friends, try watching Fox News. I mean, it's not waterboarding for intellectuals. You know, there is something interesting there. So try looking occasionally at different political points of view. All right, fiscal legislation. My laser pointer here is not going to be very effective. Take a look at this. In the back of the room, it's hard to see. Basically, for the last 44 years, we as a country spend about 20% of GDP, and we take in about 18%. So, as I say, spoiler alert, we spend more than we take in. Now, there are a couple of interesting takeaways. If you look through till the end of the Clinton administration, obviously our deficits were pronounced. Spending was higher than revenue, but we did pretty well as a country for those 40-some years. We ran deficits every year. Now, there are some very conservative politicians, a party that shall go unnamed, but it's like coffee, that simply say we cannot run deficits at all. We must keep a balanced budget. I would say this chart shows you that you can have pretty good economic development running a modest deficit. The real problem is to look, beginning in 2005, to look at the projections for where spending and revenue will go. There is a huge gap that has started, and that's coming. And that is really what is driving the politics in Washington today on this fiscal legislation. There's talk of a grand bargain. What are the elements? A tax increase, something that the Democrats wanted and got in that New Year's Day fiscal cliff bill. Spending cuts that Republicans want to see that came in the sequestration that kicked in on March 1st. And then the issue of entitlement reform, which has gone absolutely nowhere. As a country, again, it's something you've really got to understand. Congress doesn't convene in January and say, okay, let's spend X amount of money on Social Security, and let's spend Y amount of money on Medicaid, and let's spend Z amount of money on food stamps or the like. Those are all entitlement programs. Add farm subsidies, by the way. Those are entitlement programs that are automatic spending programs. We borrow now 35 cents of every dollar that we spend as a country. I mean, last year's budget, we had revenues of about $2.5 trillion and spent $3.8 trillion. And a lot of this differential, some would say that the real spending problem, it's not really an entitlement problem, it's a Medicaid, it's a health care entitlement problem. And look at those last bullets. In 1970, 43 years ago, Medicare and Medicaid constituted about 5% of the federal budget. With our aging population, we're now spending about 1/4 of our revenues on Medicare and Medicaid. And that is a large part of the fiscal problems we're facing. Now, we got some of them resolved on New Year's Day, that kind of Cinderella moment where at midnight the Bush tax cuts were going to expire. And indeed, taxes did go up by a little bit. But you had Congress overwhelmingly in the Senate, not so overwhelmingly in the House, vote for a fiscal cliff package. Key element of that package was related to energy. The production tax credit that is so important for wind, not so for solar. So the solar works really on an investment tax credit that goes through the end of 2016. But for geothermal and wind, there was a 1-year extension of the production tax credit to the end of this year, but with a twist, which involves projects that must start construction by the end of this year, not be online by the end of this year. Now, what start construction means is being interpreted by the Treasury Department very soon, but this was a big win for the renewable energy industry. In addition, with a 1-year extension of the bonus depreciation of 50%, that's also huge for companies investing in these projects. The ability to write off 1/2 of that investment in the first year. The fiscal cliff bill did raise taxes for upper income individuals. I would say it did keep in place the Bush tax cuts for 99% of the population, but the upper 1%, folks with incomes above $400,000, are facing a tax increase. The payroll tax holiday that all of us in this room, at least all of us who have jobs, enjoyed for 2 years, disappeared. Taxes did go up will go up, are going up on dividends and capital gains. Republicans opposed it. Look at that vote in the House. Only 36% of Republicans voted for this bill in the House. It got carried by the Democrats. Why? Well, more spending, higher taxes, no spending cuts. Republicans didn't like that. Having said that, I think the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, was smart enough to recognize that defending tax cuts for millionaires was not really an ideal political strategy. I do think that the fiscal cliff is here to stay. Congress set up this January 1 deadline of its own making. It set up this whole sequestration notion back in 2011, putting together a series of draconian and stupid cuts that nobody would ever go for, but unfortunately the sides could not agree. So where are we now? The Republicans would say, okay, we've done our tax increases. That was New Year's Day, so that's done. Sequestration, this $85 billion reduction this year in federal spending and $1 trillion over the next 10 years. It's there. No one is getting rid of it. Congress kind of kicked the can down the road on these issues. Back in 2011, on New Year's Day, they kicked the can down the road till March on sequestration. That's really what Congress does very well. People criticize Congress. They kick the can down the road with precision. But March 1 came, and there was no agreement, and sure enough, these cuts did kick in. And none of these cuts went to the real problem, which is Medicaid and Medicare, the entitlement programs. So we still haven't seen an answer to that. The Republicans have been gunning for a fight on entitlement spending, on overall spending for years. And I think they recognize that to try to prevent a debt ceiling increase would cause havoc with the fiscal markets, that shutting down the government at the end of this month would be too severe because there was an agreement last year to keep federal funding in place until the end of this month. So at sequestration, they probably that was where they wanted to draw their line in the sand. And much of the rest of this year will be dealing with these fiscal issues and seeing if maybe we can get rid of this last-minute series of crises. Because these fiscal issues really will impinge on the ability of Congress to look at other issues. And for those in the room, energy is really very important. Let's take a look at some of the uncertainties here in the market going ahead. Big issues, natural gas. It's had a huge impact on renewable energy. Are these low prices going to stick around, or it's going to be volatile again? Customers are looking at environmental compliance. They're looking at renewable mandates throughout the United States, not just California. They're looking at new transmission to go with renewables, and they're asking, what's it going to cost? In the political arena, surprise, surprise, gridlock continues. Really no big answers coming from Washington. But what that means is the more Congress does nothing, the more states like California, other states will take the lead on energy issues and other issues. Climate change, the president certainly stressed it in his State of the Union message, saying if Congress doesn't act, we'll take action at the EPA, and that's basically what's going to happen. Congress will do absolutely nothing on comprehensive climate change, and the Environmental Protection Agency will proceed with a series of rulemakings that will effectively put a cost on carbon, will effectively have a negative impact on coal and eventually natural gas going forward. What exactly is going to happen on tax reform? We talk a lot about that. You see a lot of that. Will the production tax credit end? There's been talk of phasing it out. The fossil fuel industry has enjoyed $4 billion in tax benefits each year. The oil depletion allowance, by the way, nobody has marked this anniversary, but 2013 marks the 100th anniversary of the oil depletion allowance. None of this 2 years, you'll get it, and we'll see what we think next year. That's in the tax code, and it's been there for 100 years. Lots of talk about tax reform. I think it's going to be very hard to do this year. After the fiscal cliff deal with the new revenue and the new taxes, I think that took care of some of the pressure on tax issues. Ultimately, tax reform, it was interesting to hear the former head of Office of Management and Budget talk about it. He said, I got a call from a senator, and he wanted to talk about tax reform, and I'd go up with my notebooks, and he'd say, I want to broaden the tax base, and I want to lower rates. And I'd say, that's great, Senator, and here's what we can do here to change the tax code. And the senator wouldn't want to look at mortgage deductions, wouldn't want to look at charitable deductions, and he'd find like a $2 million tax break, and he'd say, that's the one I want to get rid of. There's just no agreement. I mean, tax reform, it's really like my line. I mean, everybody wants to go to heaven, nobody wants to die. I mean, everybody wants tax reform, but nobody can agree on what it should be. And it really depends on your perspective. For those in the back of the room who can't read it, those are two dogs talking, and one says, I would not be opposed to a cat tax. You don't have to laugh. This is 4 years in a row. I have brought a cartoon to this talk. Nobody ever laughs, so we will go on. What exactly can Congress do? When you get right down to it, Congress can do three things. It can tax, it can spend, and it can regulate or investigate or oversee. But that's really what Congress does. So, tax. Kind of covered it. Fiscal cliff. We've covered a lot of energy issues. There's talk of a carbon tax. Every economist would tell you that's the way to deal with the issue. Now, there could be a grand bargain. If the Obama administration would say, okay, we'll call off our dogs at the EPA in return for a carbon tax, Republicans might come to the table. Or if you had a revenue-neutral carbon tax, in other words, one that did bring in revenue, but because it would be regressive, people of lower income spend more of their income on energy. If you had that returning to lower income folks and actually did not increase the government coffers, that could be attractive, but it's a real long shot. And certainly the renewable energy industry is looking at some new potential tax structures, master limited partnerships that are used for most natural gas pipelines, or real estate investment trusts, those kinds of tax structures. Unfortunately, those fly in the face of tax reform. and they limit tax revenues. So those are also going to be long shots. So tax, tough. Spending, loan guarantees are done. Thank you, Solyndra. R&D funding will continue. I think both parties really agree that that is an important role of government. Maybe not at the $526 million level to throw at a company, but at the $2 and $3 and $4 million level, there is a new federal agency, ARPA-E, that is doing a very good job of looking at, two folks in a garage are going to come up with a new energy idea. That's how Apple started. That's how a lot of things started, and that can help in the energy field. More stimulus funding ain't going to happen. So, tax, spend, regulate. California, like many other states, has a renewable energy standard, a renewable portfolio standard. Will this happen on a federal level? No. Fiscal cliff bill had some energy efficiency incentives. That's done. Energy efficiency, and you'll have other speakers today, especially Energy Commission Chairman Weisenmiller can speak to this better than I can. I have yet to figure out why energy efficiency legislation doesn't work at a federal level. It works more effectively at a state level. Fracking that you've read about with natural gas. Are we going to prohibit that at a national level? No. New York is stopping it. Other states individually have moratoria in place. And I can tell you the industry basically loves that given the huge glut, but it's not going to happen at a federal level. Delay implementation of EPA rules on fossil fuels, not going to happen except maybe with coal ash. Lots of Democratic senators from coal states don't want to see that. Nuclear waste, huge problem in our country. Unlikely to see any action there. Cybersecurity, probably the biggest issue nobody wants to talk about. Congress cannot agree on any legislation. The President issued an executive order on this the day of his State of the Union address. A lot of folks, and I'm sure many in this room, recognize the serious nature of cybersecurity. I'm not sharing a secret when I say that in our holdings company at Mid-American, we have over 1,000 attempts a day to breach our firewall. Now, maybe 95% of those could be high school juniors on a cyber joyride, but who knows? FERC oversight, yes, there will be more. The new Senate Energy Committee Chairman, Ron Wyden of Ohio, try to be diplomatic here, does not have the highest regard for FERC and certainly wants to limit what FERC would like to do, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We're going to see a lot of oversight there, no legislation. Transmission cost allocation issues, again, we'll see oversight but no legislation. And natural gas, big issue. We could talk about that for a long time. We have this huge new supply of natural gas. Should we be exporting it as a country? We don't have debates about whether we should export John Deere tractors or export Boeing jets, or, well, ones that work, or exporting crops. But there is a very interesting debate in this country about whether we should be exporting our natural gas or keeping it in this country and keeping prices low. Let me turn to the last topic, and I just want to flag a number of issues because really the rest of today and these other panels are going to be covering these issues. The renewable energy challenges facing California. California, we're the victim of success. A huge amount of renewable energy has come online in the last 6 years. Whether it was actually, let's go back to Gray Davis and to Arnold Schwarzenegger and to Jerry Brown, a consistent policy of promoting renewable energy with agencies like the PUC, the Energy Commission, putting together plans to implement. And now dealing with those problems. Solar energy has been so successful, it is now pushing natural gas off the system in the middle of the day. So you've got natural gas plants losing money right and left, but they're needed to integrate with renewables. Those integration costs from wind and solar have been largely hidden from ratepayers. Something's got to give there. And really, what is the goal here in California? Is the goal, let's get more renewables? If that's the goal, California's been very successful at that. 20%, 33%, you name it. I think the better goal should be solving not for renewable energy, solving for lower greenhouse gas emissions at the lowest cost to customers while still keeping the lights on, read reliability. So maybe we'll be moving to kind of a multi-purpose procurement based perhaps on cost plus value, where you don't have someone at a utility looking only at cost and someone else looking only at resource adequacy. Get rid of these silos and maybe just kind of getting beyond the concept of cheap renewables. More challenges. And again, we could spend 30, 40 minutes on each one of these bullet points. What's going to happen? What's the impact of SONGS? That's 2,500 megawatts from a nuclear plant that's been shut down now for quite some time. What happens if it doesn't come back? What's going to be the impact of the once-through cooling requirements from another California agency of 12,000 megawatts? Commissioner Weisenmiller, correct me if I'm wrong, coming offline by 2020. If not 12,000, a pretty big number. Look at the impact of distributed generation. Southern California Edison told me last week they've got 21,000 rooftop solar systems in their territory, growing by 3% a month. What's that do to your rate structure? The need for energy storage, critical. If California moves, as it moves, to 33% renewables or more, especially with intermittent renewables. What's the impact going to be of electric vehicles? New markets for the utilities, certainly useful. You could also see that as a way to help reliability in a funny way. Agency cooperation. It's awfully good today. The California, the CPUC, the CalISO, the Energy Commission, the Air Resources Board, the Governor's Office, they meet on a regular basis, and they really are coordinating very well. What happens 5 years from now if there are different personalities? Does California need a Department of Energy? And really the overall trend in California, you know, in the rest of the United States, my company, we've got a lot of coal plants. And in the rest of the U.S., people are asking the question, why coal? In California, people are beginning to ask the question, why natural gas? Let me end on the last challenge. Bullets here kind of hard to read, but the real challenge is the need for a broader energy imbalance market, a market that can economically dispatch resources in real time. CalISO has a 5-minute energy imbalance market. Let me contrast this. In the Midwest, our company has built a huge amount of wind in Iowa. Iowa is actually almost equal to California as number 2 in the United States after Texas, almost tied for 2 in wind production. Why have we built so much wind? And we're 31% wind in Iowa because we sell it into what's called the Midwest Independent System Operator, much like the California Independent System Operator. But the MISO, the Midwest Independent System Operator, consists of 12 states and Alberta, Canada. So we're selling into a huge market that can balance supply and demand. We could be 71% wind today. We could be 51% because of this big market. Our company entered into a memorandum of agreement just about a month ago with the CalISO. CalISO is the largest grid operator in the West. Our company is the second largest. We entered into an MOU to try to establish create an energy imbalance market that we could join, moving more towards this system in the Midwest. It's amazing that California, the leader in renewable energy, is such a laggard in this market issue. Let me jump ahead. In the West, there are 37 separate balancing authorities, like the CalISO. IID is its own balancing authority. It must balance supply and demand all the time. LADWP, SMUD. There are some utilities with one power plant that are their own balancing authorities in the West. It's different in the rest of the United States. With a larger balancing authority, you basically are going to help meet the challenges of reliability. It will be terrific for customers, and it will be great for integrating renewable resources. So capturing a wider portfolio of resources on a larger geographic basis, Economics 101 would tell you that's how you can get there. So we're kind of hopeful that this will be a trend. Maybe other utilities will join, but that really is a ton of California challenges that will be addressed in the rest of the conference. So on that, I will end with my slide of those 37 fiefdoms, but that's a real challenge facing the West. It's a challenge facing California, and it's one that can be easily addressed. And I'll stress, our company is not joining the CalISO. Our company is entering into agreement to create an energy imbalance market. That's one product. It doesn't mean giving up your transmission lines. This is something that I hope other Western groups will look at because it will go a long way towards addressing a lot of those challenges. On that note, thank you very much. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Jonathan, very much, and thank you for coming out from the East Coast to the beautiful weather we've got here. Okay, we're running a little behind, but we're going to go into next the panel A, which is the new realities for the renewable energy industry. You all have these cards in the middle of your table. We've changed the system a little bit so that if you have a question, please mark your questions, write them down on these cards. We will have IVEDC staff walking around. Just raise your hand and they will pick these up and bring them up to the front. This is to help those of you that are too shy to get up in the microphone and speak. You can still ask your questions, okay? We're trying to make this more efficient.